Welcome to the Time for a Reset podcast, the podcast where I, Paul Frampton, interview senior marketers on the big issues of the day and the thing that they want to see reset with an ever-changing landscape. Good afternoon and welcome back to another episode of Time for a Reset. This afternoon, I'm delighted to be joined by Jada Balster, who is the CMO for Workfront, which has recently been acquired by Adobe. Workfront is where Jada has worked for 7 years before she was part of the acquisition from Adobe, which I believe happened at the end of last year, which I'm sure Jada will touch on. And Jada's had a long career in B2B marketing, so looking forward to getting her views about how B2B is different to other sorts of marketing. So welcome, Jada. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I am good.
Well, I think you've heard a few of our podcasts, so you know where we start. We always start by what is the thing that you'd like to hit reset on? So I'd love to hear your answer.
Yeah, so I have heard a few. I have very much been enjoying the podcast, so delighted to be here.
Thank you.
So when I think about what I want to hit reset on, I want to hit reset on the amount of time that marketers spend on the job that they were actually hired to do, which might sound cryptic. So should I tell you what I mean by that?
Yeah, no, definitely it is cryptic.
So at Workfront, we have run this survey for the last 7 years called the State of Work, and it really explores what's going on in the workplace. And every year we see some pretty astounding results, but one that stays really consistent and not in a good way is that on average, global knowledge workers spend roughly 40% of their work week performing the job that they were hired to do. And you can cut that figure in half for marketers. So what we found consistently year after year after year is that marketers spend only 19% of their time on the job that they were hired to do. The thing they're excited about, the thing they come to work for every day, they get to spend less than a day a week on that. And that is what I want to hit reset on.
Wow. That is a shocking statistic, isn't it?
Scary statistic for sure.
Well, we often talk about the 80-20 rule, but the 80-20 rule is completely upside down with that one, isn't it?
Exactly. And, it's interesting because when I talk to marketers about this, I sometimes get the comment of, oh, I wish I got to spend that much time. I think hopefully that's more of the exception than the norm. But,
right.
On average, less than a day a week on the job you're hired to do, that is not okay on so many different levels.
No, I agree. I mean, people are attracted to marketing for, I think, pretty clear reasons: understanding people, creativity, communication. And if you're only spending, like you say, a day a week doing that, I'm sure that wasn't what people signed up to in the first place. So, what is this other 80% then, Jada, in your opinion? Like, what creates so much noise and distraction that means that marketers can't do marketing?
Yeah, so I like to call it busy work. So it's all of those things that just get in the way of us doing our best work. So it's going to meetings, it's administrative tasks, it's emails, it's doing status updates, and then another status update, and another status update. It's all of those manual and repetitive tasks that are taking us away from, really the thing that we excel at. And actually, most importantly, it's taking us away from the things that actually drive the difference in a business.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a critical point, isn't it? I mean, I've talked to many guests on this podcast about the importance that marketing has a real clear leadership role at the board table and within business. And if busy work, to use your phrase, is actually taking over from listening to customers and kind of customer experience and things like that, that's rather concerning.
Yeah, definitely. And I think often it comes from maybe not knowing what direction you should be going towards. So I think it's easy to overcompensate. So you go to more meetings, you do more status updates because you're finding it hard to say no to these ad hoc requests because prioritizing becomes impossible. So, I think there's a lot that we can do as leaders to really help with that because that sort of environment just causes stress. It's the sort of stress that we can feel in our bones, and it creates a really unhealthy environment for people to work in.
Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, I think if you ask most people, do you attend too many meetings? I think we all know what the answer is, but there are still few hacks for kind of cutting meetings down, particularly in this video world we live in, where we all just seem to go from one Zoom call to maybe Teams and then back to Zoom. This is as different as it gets, isn't it?
Yeah, mixing up platform is the excitement of the day. But I completely agree. And definitely the pandemic has absolutely exacerbated the problem that we have. And it's really interesting. So this report that we did, we actually surveyed the audience in February, and then we got the results back in March, and it was all completely irrelevant because that everything had kicked off with the pandemic. So we surveyed again at the end of the year, and it was really, really interesting. And to your point, the pandemic has definitely made it worse. And we found that off the back of that, we had 62% of marketers felt underappreciated. 52% felt like their work didn't matter, and 43% felt they weren't having good communication with their colleagues or their managers. And so all of these things have really been heightened over the last year. So it's definitely something that as leaders and as marketing leaders, we have to lean into.
Yeah, they are. They're not the type of statistics that drive job satisfaction, are they?
Absolutely.
I've had other conversations with different marketers on this podcast in the last year, talking about how exhausted they and their colleagues have been, because obviously things have got cut, and then suddenly you've tried to launch a new website, or e-commerce kind of proposition has been pushed forward and needs to be accelerated, or there's more customers coming in through certain distribution points than expected. And I think it's created lots of challenges for marketers, but possibly some good opportunity as well, which maybe we'll come on to that a little bit later. But before we do, just want to stay with your kind of thought around busy work. So let's assume, given that statistic is 90% from all respondents, let's assume that it's a fairly kind of common issue across organizations. How do you with your marketing team try to ensure that kind of, some of that busy work has got to be done, right? I mean, you can't just ignore it, and some of it probably could be removed. But how do you, as a leader of a marketing team, keep the team focused on what you think is going to drive the most value and alignment to the vision?
Yeah, totally. And I think, to be clear, I am definitely not saying that there is zero busy work in my team, because to your point, there's some things that you just cannot eradicate. I think the important thing is streamlining where possible, and then understanding the impact that it has on your team. So I talked about people feeling underappreciated, like their work doesn't matter, like they don't have good communication. I think focusing on how you can help with what comes from this busy work is important. So for me, a few things that I really try and focus on. So really, first one I would say is setting that North Star. So having a really clear vision around, what do we need to achieve as a team? What are our strategic goals, and how does everyone's work align to that? And I am a big fan. I really appreciate the value of having strategic goals that then cascade through the organization, and very, very clear alignment about how everyone's work connects to those goals. I find that is hugely important in terms of battling all of those things that we've talked about. So I'd say that's one. The second, my style personally is an over communicator. I think the more information that you can provide your teams, the more context that you can set for them, the more that they can feel like they understand the ins and outs of what's going on in the business, the better. So that's the second one for me. And the third, which again is something I feel really passionate about, is providing people with the opportunity to do stretch projects, to think about things that are aligned to the company's priorities, and see where they can take on additional responsibility. And I think there's a balance, of course, between not overwhelming people and giving them opportunities. But I think giving team members the opportunity to do something new, especially in highly visible areas of the business, giving them that exposure to the senior leadership team, that helps with the feeling underappreciated, feeling like their work doesn't matter. That's something that I find is really, really key to helping with some of those issues.
Great. Now, I love I love all of that, and I think a lot of people talk about those things, but I can hear the passion in your voice in making sure that those things actually live and breathe within the team. I remember in our pre-chat, Jada, you talked about like the start to your career, which threw you into some of those stretch projects maybe earlier than some. I'd love it if you wouldn't mind sharing that story, because I think it's kind of a useful one for people to hear, and how they can think about maybe artificially creating that environment to drive that kind of growth more quickly at the start of their careers.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting because the situation at the beginning of my career was one that probably panicked me, and I had no idea of what an impact it would have on the future. So actually my first proper marketing role, so I was in the UK team. There was a marketing director, a senior marketing manager, and then me. And great team, really good exposure to my first kind of my first time within this B2B marketing environment. And I was at the company within about 6 months of me joining. All the marketing director, the senior marketing manager, and the marketing manager all left within I think it was within less than a week of each other. Like, it was mass exodus for different reasons. And I was left 6 months into my career as the only person in the UKI marketing team.
You're the marketing director.
Exactly. I mean,
no one above
promotion. Yeah. Found myself reporting into the global, to the VP of worldwide marketing, and found myself, in conversations and in meetings that probably I had absolutely no business to be in 6 months into my career. And I laugh about it now. At the time, I certainly wasn't laughing. I was pretty panicked about it and thinking, how am I going to do this? And how I had and still have very high expectations for myself, and holding myself accountable and making sure that we were performing as we needed to. And it was just me going, how am I going to do this? So, I mean, I had amazing support during that time from the VP of worldwide marketing. But as I said, I was suddenly exposed to conversations and insights and all of these things which I would never have happened at that point in my career. And I say often, I truly think that set me up for my future career, and it got me thinking in a different way. Very, very early on, I'm asking questions of the things that I've learned from senior leadership, and what that taught me, and what I really try to think about now is how I can expose my team, and how people earlier in their career can get exposed to that type of information sooner rather than later. Because I think having that bigger picture, understanding, while not overwhelming people, but understanding, what are the priorities of the company and how does their job align to that, actually makes a huge difference in their progression and just the way they think about the business, and then the results that they provide because of that.
Yeah, such an important point, Jada, such an important point. When I used to mentor people, I often told them to think about what's on your boss's to-do list and how you can help take things off them, because far too many people just get stuck with their own to-do list and don't really think how it anchors to the company objectives or the vision. And as soon as you're thrust into that, suddenly your influence and your importance in the company transforms overnight, doesn't it?
Totally. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So let's change tack a little bit. Marketers, as you touched on, have had to constantly navigate change for forever, but somewhat more quickly and probably more voraciously in the last 12 months. How have you navigated the change that you've seen during your time, not just in Workfront, and obviously the Adobe experience is a more recent one, but how have you adapted? And I'm particularly interested in like how marketers instill either the concept of agility or the actual kind of methodology of agility.
Yeah, so when I think about the last year, it has certainly been a time of change in many, many ways, and agility has been really key. Global pandemic, acquisition. It's funny, I actually have one of my team members who's just recently come back from maternity leave. She had a year out during a pandemic, we got acquired.
Different company.
and she actually has come back to a new job as well, doing something slightly different. So I say to her so often, she's just doing an incredible job just by being there. What a year for all of us. And I really think that marketers in general are exceptional at adapting to change. I have found, we have to deal with changing market dynamics. We have to deal with changing company strategy, acquisitions, all of these different things that get thrown at us. And then we figure out how to pivot and how to have a coherent, externally facing message. And I think the term agile gets thrown around a lot, whether that be as a methodology or as a less formally as just a way of being. But I think times like this, marketers can really lead from the front in their organizations. We can really demonstrate resilience, but also the need to pivot very quickly when we need to. And I really feel like that's a bit of a USP about marketing teams. A lot of functions have, not surprisingly, really, really struggled over the last year about how to pivot and how to adjust and how to be agile. But what I found is that marketers in general, they have that skill set because they've had to do it in different ways, of course, but they've been having to do it for a long time.
Yeah, no. I think you're absolutely right. And obviously the Adobe acquisition feels like a really suited one. It feels like a perfect marriage between what Workfront does and Adobe's vision. Adobe, I guess, is all about marketing. That's its raison d'etre, around technology and software that automates and improves kind of operations within marketing. I'm fascinated about how kind of the board of Adobe or the leadership team, from your exposure, how do they think about marketing themselves as an organization?
Yeah, so Adobe's mission is to change the world through digital experiences, and I mean that proved to be more relevant than ever. Personally, as a marketer, working at an organization that not only understands the value of a marketer but champions and advocates for marketers is just a dream come true. What marketer isn't excited by a company like Adobe? So when I think about the acquisition and what Workfront and Adobe together can do for marketers and are doing for marketers, it really excites me. So you mentioned earlier, I joined Workfront 7 years ago. And as you can imagine, I very quickly started using the Workfront platform, and I'd never seen or used anything like it before. And I just remember so clearly thinking, my goodness, my old company could do with something like this. I hadn't ever experienced thinking about a different way to manage work. And I think the way that Adobe has just really gone from being a very, very creative focused organization to also really thinking about marketers overall and how they can support and advocate and enable them to do their best work is really, it's fantastic to be part of a company that feels so passionately about that. Great.
Well, maybe some of the companies that said that that only 19% of their time was spent on marketing, maybe they need to actually come and talk to you about deploying your software.
Yeah, come talk to us. We'll help you.
Because then they might actually be able to spend a bit more time on the strategic, high-value stuff.
Well, and that's it. We laugh about it, but that is exactly what we need to get people doing. Focusing their time on the work that is going to add the most value, not this busy work. So, yeah, totally.
And over the last, I suppose it's just a year, slightly over a year, isn't it? How has COVID impacted your go-to-market strategy? Have you pivoted and changed much during this period when your own marketing?
So much, So first of all, COVID has been incredibly hard for everyone in just so many ways, personally and professionally. But you mentioned it earlier, I do think there are some professional positives. So firstly, I mean, we've all heard many, many quotes and facts about how COVID sped up digital transformation and all of those wonderful things, which is fantastic. It absolutely has. But what has actually excited me more is I actually think COVID has also forced many marketers to double down and really invest in their own professional development and their own digital strategy. And I'll give you a personal example. So Workfront is a B2B SaaS business, and like many businesses like ours, events has always been so core to our marketing strategy. It's been that ever reliable source of generating pipeline, which is of course crucial to my team, our role in the company. So as marketers, we know that we all generally have a finite budget. We generally have targets that we're held accountable to. So we stick with tried and tested ways of working. And we certainly do have always done some small experiments and tried some different things on a small scale. But honestly, before 2020, what marketer in their right mind would take a massive chunk of their budget and pump into something that was either unknown, or they just had an inkling that it could be good, but no data to back it up? And so this last year, when you talk about a change in strategy and a change in approach, like this has changed everything for my team. So we have been dabbling in testing new channels on a small scale and getting some positive results. But if I'm completely honest, I don't think we had the nerve to go all in, to take big risks and pull budget out of something tried and tested and put it elsewhere. And this last 12 months, we have really invested in new channels and specifically new digital channels that we were excited about but couldn't. And, it's transformed our strategy, our marketing strategy in so many ways.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. From talking to a lot of B2B marketers, I think like over time, there's been obviously a shift towards more using different digital channels, but very much so in the last year, it's been events went to webinars. And then once people kind of got fatigued with webinars, it's now, okay, well, how else can we engage people, particularly given we haven't got a sales force out on the streets. So it does feel that B2B has embraced kind of finding new audiences and telling stories through content in a different way in the last year, which to some extent makes it a little bit more similar to the way B2C works, doesn't it?
Oh, totally. I couldn't agree more. And I think, where in the B2B world, everything was so focused on pipeline, which then came from leads to opportunities to pipeline. And it was very much focused on that top of funnel flow. I think what this time has given everyone the opportunity to do is learn more about how engaging with your customers over a longer period of time really helps, and then also how to help progress those opportunities by continuing to nurture them in different ways throughout the sales cycle. And I actually couldn't agree more. I think that whole piece, especially if you think about in the enterprise software space, I think that's moved much more towards the high-end luxury B2C approach. It's been a really interesting transition.
And when you've thought about, like, as you've shifted that kind of investment more towards digital, and I guess, as you said, you've got different data coming in telling you what's working, has that meant you've started to hire different types of people, or has it been more about upskilling teams, or a combination?
I think it's a bit of both. I strongly believe that we, as leaders, we have a responsibility for upskilling and supporting and enabling teams to prepare them for the future and to make sure that they're thriving in the future. You can't just go, okay, I want to look for bigger and better. It's about really developing people. But also I think probably 10 years ago, maybe even less, the digital skill set was a nice to have. And it was, maybe you might have one digital marketer in your team. And, now I really believe that that's something that all marketers need to have, maybe not as a specialism, but I think all marketers need to have an interest there. The other, as well as digital, the other place that, I feel like we've really needed to double down and focus on is content and storytelling, and really that, what's that creative storytelling that really resonates. I think long gone are the days when data sheets did a job, and really making sure that you have great content that you can put out through these incredible and sophisticated new digital channels is really, really important.
Yeah, and not that many people want to read a 30-page white paper anymore, do they? They want slightly more.
Did they ever?
True. Did they ever? That's true. Everyone still used it as a go-to strategy.
Exactly.
And are there any from the digital channels that you started to invest in, are there any kind of interesting insights into what's working well for you particularly?
Yeah, I think it's actually I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the focus on not the core inbound traditional top of funnel metrics. So we, as a team, we've been really looking at how we continue to touch and engage with customers and prospects post opportunity or post sale. So like we've all heard the stats around, the cost of retaining a customer versus getting a new customer. But, customer experiences is something that I think over the last few years has become hugely important to organizations, but more and more important to marketing teams as well. We are not teams that just generate the sale and then hand them off anymore. It's really about how we keep that engagement, how we then, in our world, in the B2B SaaS world, how we help with adoption and retention and all of those things. So actually looking at different phases of the customer journey has been really insightful, how marketing can actually impact there, where we had traditionally very much focused on that top of the funnel, early stage part of the journey. So I think that's been really interesting. And when we talk about the teams, when we talked earlier about stretch projects and things that teams can get their teeth into, I think looking at some of those new areas that way has been really, really positive for my team.
Really interesting. It often amazes me that not much time is spent focusing on retention in a lot of marketing teams, and so much is spent on new campaigns and launches and finding new customers. But you make a great point that the experience, if the experience is good after sale and then it continues, then you've got a strong foundation, particularly in SaaS businesses, for a long time, and it means you potentially don't need to spend quite as much on acquisition, because a lot of businesses are constantly filling the gap of the churn and then having to add on top, so their growth is sometimes compromised.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think marketers really leaning into retention and making sure that customers are happy and thriving and getting the information that they need. That's something that perhaps marketers didn't think was their role previously, but actually is becoming more and more everyone's role. So yeah, couldn't agree more.
Great. Okay, well, Jada, I'd love to ask you a couple of personal questions as we come towards the end of this chat. So what's one thing that you personally kind of are working on or committing to do kind of better? You're obviously developing your team a lot. You spend a lot of time helping them to understand the vision, but what's the thing that you're trying to do, particularly, I guess, as you've got a new parent company with lots of expectations? How are you kind of focusing on growth yourself?
Yeah, it's such an interesting time for us as we integrate with Adobe, and we look at the opportunities of this Adobe plus work management story together. But my focus for now is really thinking about, how can our team continue to support the business and thrive, but also, come into the world of Adobe, adapt to the Adobe way, but also, take some of the best practices from being in a smaller organization and really expose the Adobe team to some of that. Whether I'm biased or not, I'm incredibly proud of my team, and I think that some of the things that they've been able to do is just extraordinary in terms of the impact that they're having. So definitely my big focus is really making sure that the team get the opportunity to come into Adobe to show some of the great work that they've done. And my dream is to see that scale, to see that then becomes something that becomes not just a Workfront thing, but an Adobe thing as well. So that's definitely a key priority for me right now.
Nice, good ambition. And if you were to leave listeners with one piece of advice they should consider as marketeers in this crazy changing, fast moving landscape, you've talked about a few things, but is there one other thing you'd leave the listeners with?
Yeah, you know what? When I think about my career and the biggest impact, it goes back to that story that I told you earlier about my first role. So I would say, in that vein, my one piece of advice, whatever level you are at, whether you are right at the beginning of your career, is lean in, ask for more information than perhaps your level requires. And really, as soon as you can, think about the bigger picture and, especially the functions that sit alongside you, that, it's very easy to go, well, this is my role, this is my function, this is my job, but this is what my boss is interested in. But really broadening your horizons to look at all of the different things around you and up to the bigger company goals and objectives as early as you can in your career, and make them your North Star is definitely where I would focus.
Nice. I love that advice. And I think, as you say, whether that's a budding marketeer at the beginning of their career or it's someone further into their career, that's always a good thing to keep top of mind. And the other thing I think you've left us with very clearly is, as a marketeer or a head of marketing or a marketing director or whatever, someone that's running a marketing team, it's important to help your teams get away from the busy work and focus on the things that are going to make a difference to that company vision. And I think you've shared some great thoughts on how you do it as a marketing leader. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jada.
Thank you so much for having me. I have really enjoyed our chat, so appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Time for a Reset. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did. We'll be back talking to a senior marketeer very soon. Make sure you don't miss out on any new episodes by subscribing on Apple, Spotify or SoundCloud, and leave us a review at timeforareset.co.uk.